Chapter 44, Rumblings on Seattle Fault Lines. We knew the money from the sale was going to be large, but the people power was the same small group of diligent helpers who had always been in the struggle. If any of them dropped out and jumped ship, it wasn't going to work to leave only some of us rowing the boat. Right away, we decided that a couple of our board members would set up private meetings with each member of our church. They would hold discussions about the personal cost of making this leap. We weren't sure we could do it, even if everyone agreed to stay on. Some people would have emotional connections to the old site, and they weren't ever going to move. Their age and station of life was not meant for a change of this magnitude. Others were of the poverty class themselves and realistically had little to offer in skills or finances to assist us on the journey. Our selected board members met with each member to get feedback and hear their personal opinions, doubts, and their fears. We asked members to sign a 1-year pledge if they were all in. The pledge was that for 1 year, they would be willing to serve and give, come hell or high water, to make this transformation. After that, they would be free to leave with our blessing and find another church if they wanted to go. We wanted to stress to them that if we weren't all going to do this journey, then we aren't strong enough, and we would be better off to quit now and never undertake the project rather than have several of them abandon us during the escape plan. All but 2 of our non-elderly members agreed. After we signed the papers to complete the sale of the building, before finding a new site, and long before we swung the first hammer to start construction, several who had signed the pledge left us anyway. That's church people. At the same time board members were conducting those talks, we were also adjusting the board by electing new leadership. The requirements for the next phase of our journey would need some new talent and skills at the top levels. The time demands were going to increase. A couple of us were tasked with traveling all over town scouting potential new locations for the church. We looked at dozens of buildings in a wide range of area. We finally settled on a fantastic little corner store that sits on a main drag in an old 1940s era business district in the center of Spokane. It was a beer, cigarette, and candy bar store, only a 10-minute drive north of downtown. Our leaders all toured it, and we took some of our people who have high gifts of spiritual discernment to the site. After praying over it, they all agreed this was where Jesus wanted us to move. It was 6,300 square feet on a main floor with 3,500 square feet of unfinished basement. It was also $80,000 cheaper than any other place we had investigated. The plan was for the sale to close in early February of 2014. We would be building out the new space, moving, and hopefully open by May. We began collecting bids from contractors. In January, Mars Hill leadership informed us that they were consolidating all of their holdings into one bank and wanted us to hold off on the closing date because our title, in limbo, would mess up their banking plan. Instead, they wanted us to roll the closing date to early April. We discussed it and agreed this would be fine. This was easier on us anyway. We had a 12,000 square foot building downtown full of junk accumulated over 100 years. The inventory and cleaning weren't going to be easy. We altered our plans to do our build out through the summer months and reopen in September. Mars Hill had put down $30,000 in earnest money in November, so we asked for another $30,000. They agreed, and we adjusted the closing date to April. In March of 2014, rumblings began regarding the entire structure of Mars Hill Church and its leader, Mark Driscoll. Former staff members and lay volunteers began speaking out against the tyrannical practices of the pastor. Bloggers began to make it their personal mission to expose the church for being corrupt and abusive. Financial mismanagement accusations were being slung at them. I understood that behind the scenes, Mars Hill was compiling a huge amount of money in a fund to deal with potential lawsuits and to possibly make restitution to former employees who had been unjustly dismissed. The stink of dead and rotting things was being dug up in Seattle, and we found ourselves downwind in Spokane. A day before the April closing date, their financial officer called us to drop the bombshell that the lending institution with whom they had been consolidating all their financial holdings denied them any more loan money to purchase us. We could tell by their tone and bewildering shock that this was a momentous occasion. They had never been denied before in their history of big decisions. They were stunned, to say the least. As I understood it, the previous October they had offered us just over $1.255 million for our site. At the same time, they offered $1.5 million for the vacant lot just to the south of us, and had another $1 million to keep the Spokane satellite location up and running. Their plan was to put $375,000 down on our site and pay the rest through a loan. By the April closing date, they had only put down $60,000 in earnest money, and they were broke. Their enterprises were disintegrating. Giving was plummeting, and people were fleeing their churches like wildlife running from a forest fire. They begged us for another 30 days. What choice did we have? We asked for another $30,000 in earnest money, but they balked, claiming the financial officer didn't have authority to approve it. They couldn't do anything more. Our church treasurer, Bill, had spent his career in investment banking with Stanley Morgan. He began coaching their guy on what to do next and how to shop the loan around. They seemed to be inexperienced with getting a no answer and didn't know what to do next. We took a deep breath and waited while their world unraveled, shrunk, and twisted like cheap clothing in an unbalanced washing machine. The deadline in May came and went, and we didn't hear anything. We contacted them only to find that some of the men who had been speaking with us were no longer with the company. The main contact person, who was the party responsible for the negotiation, was on vacation. I thought going on vacation with $1 million deadline on the table was a sign of belligerent lying or gross incompetence. I began to pack my office. We were not going to make the sale after all, and the only alternative would be to simply close down. It was now the third or fourth time in my years as pastor that I once again prepared to close the church. I expected to be gone before the end of summer. A week later, they called us back to say they thought that we would carry the loan for them, and they were waiting for us to make terms to them. We had a denominational expert from our headquarters in Chicago who was helping us with all the real estate transactions and running the contracts past lawyers to help us out. They somehow got the idea from a loose conversation with him that we, as a local church, could carry the loan to them on our building. There was one main problem with that idea. We would have no money to go to pursue our dream. No, we firmly responded. This is your offer and your deal. And at this point, you need to make an offer on what you're proposing as the buyer. Our proposal is that you pay us the money you agreed to pay in the original offer, or simply forfeit the earnest money and walk away, and we will resell to someone else. We realized we would have $60,000 to use while we put the building back up for sale. That might buy us a few extra months. They came back with a proposal to put no additional money down and make $10,000 a month payments, all going to principal, for the next 5 years, and they would pay the balance at the end of that term. Let me get this straight, I answered our real estate agent on the phone when he informed me of their offer. The 15,000-member, 17-campus, $35 million in assets, and $30 million per year income Mars Hill Church wants our 30-member, 20 drunks and 4 dogs church that's $180,000 in debt and loses $5,000 a month in income to take a 5% down payment, which we already own as forfeited earnest money, and then give them an interest-free loan for over $1 million over the next 5 years? You tell them not only that I said no, but after a few more words and phrases, which I thought Mark Driscoll would be very familiar with from his own mouth, our real estate agent laughed and said, "Why don't you let me do the negotiating?" Several days later, they came back with a deal, which was to put no additional money down and pay interest only for 5 years on the $1.255 million loan, which we would carry. So they went from offering $10,000 a month to offering $5,000 a month. I didn't even bother to respond to our agent. It was over again. I walked out of the church on Sunday, May 11th, 2014, Mother's Day, knowing my years of effort had ended. We didn't have a sale after all. We were out of money, out of time. I could not keep going. Jesus must have other plans. 6.5 years of my ministry life seemed wasted and tossed aside. My wife and I began preparing to shut down the church and hand over the building keys to the denominational offices in Seattle. We planned on being out by the end of June. 2 weeks later, Mars Hill contacted us and offered to put an additional $190,000 down, combining with the earnest money to make it a $250,000 down payment on the agreed-upon price of $1.255 million. They also agreed to make $10,000 per month payments for the next 2 years, with half going to principal and half going to rent. The full purchase price of the balance, some $900,000, was to be given at the end of the 2 years. We contacted our beer and cigarettes and candy bar grocery store owner to see if we could swing the same deal with him. $65,000 down, $4,000 per month payments with half going to rent and half to principal, and the balance paid when our building sold in 2 years? He agreed. This meant we would have only $160,000 after paying real estate fees to do our build-out. It was super tight, but possible. We inked the deal in June and prepared to move out in August. Our plan was to hold volunteer work projects on Sunday mornings for the next 3 months. That meant we would meet at the new site, sing some worship songs to a lone acoustic guitar, and have a sermonette. The benediction of the service was usually something like, "Okay, everyone, put on your gloves, grab your hammers and crowbars. We're going to tear down this ceiling. Amen." That would be church for the next few months. It would take more than 3 months to actually get it done. In the fall of 2014, well underway with our demolition, Mars Hill pastor Mark Driscoll resigned. The church collapsed and broke apart. Mars Hill ceased to exist as an incorporated church by that December. We were still under construction.